Hey,
Hi.
everybody. Welcome to D&G Live. Happy to have everyone today. This should be a really, really fun show. I'm Gil. That's my co-host, Gurpreet. And today we're welcoming my friend Michaud, founder of Weird is Normal, to talk about a topic that honestly, I think it plagues pretty much every organization that I've seen, in that when going from an individual contributor to becoming a manager, it isn't just a promotion. It is genuinely a career change. It is a change in behavior. It is a change in skills required. And it is a change in the outcomes that you're achieving and the way you ultimately achieve them. So I'm really excited to have Michaud on the show. And I'm going to toss it over to you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about this topic that you've chosen.
Okay, thanks, Gil. Also, your intro was super cool. I was jazzed watching it. I started dancing. Yeah, it's this thing that people don't really talk about that much, and maybe in certain circles they do. But going from just like doing your job, being an individual contributor, to then being a manager and being in charge of making sure that like other people do their job, that there's a vision, that people know clearly what's going to happen, and coaching and supporting others is a fundamentally different thing than you were doing before. And it's positioned as this like natural progression of your career. But yeah, engineer turned manager in the chat. Okay, cool. I'd love to hear from that. Yeah, it's a deep change in what's expected to you, and it's not just like an addition to what you are already doing.
I think that's a great point, that we think of it as a natural progression, but for a lot of people, it's not a natural progression. For a lot of people, that we're told the only way to kind of climb up the corporate ladder is to go from being an individual contributor to a manager. But the person has amazing IC skills, whatever that job is, whatever the task is, could be domain expertise or whatever it might be. But they don't necessarily have the skills to manage people, to get other people to do the job effectively. What are some of the biggest deficits that you see? Some of the biggest problems you see when people step into that role without any sort of training?
I think the biggest issue is that people, they're these high achievers, right? So they get put into these positions because they've been high achievers, and typically they're high achievers because they have a certain way of working, moving toward goals, reacting under pressure, and then they project that onto everybody else. And so when they come into these managerial leadership roles, they don't necessarily see their colleagues or the people that report to them as different people, but they see them as versions of themselves. And so then they try to manage, motivate, communicate with them in the exact way that they want to be communicated with, without ever asking or communicating with those people to find out what works for them. And so it's like they go in and just start managing a whole bunch of versions of themselves, but that doesn't work because it's not a bunch of versions of themselves.
This reminds me of a while back when we were allowed to be around other humans. I was at an event and seeing this leader from a company talking about performance, and they were asked a question of, when you have an employee who was performing really well before and then they stop performing well, how do you respond? And this leader, who is very competent and capable in their field, starts talking about performance improvement plans and what they would do and the changes they would make. In the entire time, I was just thinking to myself, please just say ask. Please just say ask. Ask what's going on. That was never part of the answer. So here's the problem, is that here's a person who's a leader, very good at what they do, and then they're promoting this as that's management, that's leadership behavior, is doing at people, as opposed to doing that asking, which is what you're talking about, is understanding that you're not all just they're not all just an extension of you. They're their own individuals. They have their own opinions, own way of doing things. I always talk about, one of my favorite words is the concept of sonder, which is the recognition that everybody else is living a life with the same depth and richness and complexity in their mind that you are, and it's continuing when you're not around. It's a tough concept for a lot of managers to understand, because they're told, you're great, make everybody like that.
100%. And there's also that, like when you're an IC, you're faced with problems, and depending on what your job is, when you're an IC, you can probably just like bash your head against the problem and eventually be able to solve it. But people are fundamentally different from like that. You have to just take a fundamentally different approach when you're thinking about people versus when you're thinking about, say, like an engineering problem or a systems problem or something that's complex, but in a very different way. Like individuals have so much complexity to them that you can't just like tackle it and expect the results that happen with somebody else, right? Like it's not as replicable.
Yes, there isn't a predictability to it, right? Which I find often frustrates people, because to get into that position, they are often domain experts. They are often experts in whatever it is they were doing to get to that point, right? And now the inputs into their results are other people, as opposed to the tools and whatever they have, and understanding that how you then get those results is different. But then that creates a lot of frustration, I find, right? Because like you described, these are high achievers. They're the ones who are at the front end of the curve in the performance. And then they're now overviewing everybody else who, by their nature, has now regressed to the mean, that they're all worse performers than you are.
Yeah, it's so frustrating.
People to kind of resist the urge to take over.
I think that's the hardest thing. And so part of it is just being really clear about what it means to be a manager, to be a leader, and that maybe that's not for them, right? Like there always needs to be the option that what you're doing might not be the right fit.
I think this is a great time to actually bring up that there's a comment here about what does management material actually look like, right? Of understanding that it's not for everybody, and it's not for everybody who strives for it even, right? Not just because you want to be in management, just because you want to move up that corporate ladder doesn't mean that it actually is something that you should be doing. Which is interesting, because some of the wisest people I know are really high achievers who choose to be individual contributors because they know they're not management material. So what does that mean to you then, Michaud? What are you looking for when you are looking for somebody who would be able to settle into that role more easily?
It's almost counter to the characteristics of the high achiever, typically. So it's someone that looks outside of themselves, that wants other people to succeed, that listens and cares about the needs of others, that doesn't need to be in that spotlight, that accepts blame, that is part of a whole. And like the fundamental, I think, piece is that they see their success in the success of others. And I think that if that, like, fundamentally, if that is there, if the person truly thrives from seeing other people grow and thrive and succeed, then from that as a base, that's where really good leadership can come from.
I want to ask you something. I want to go back to the start of this topic, how it's a career change and not a promotion. Why do you see it as a career change and not a promotion? Because many of us, when we're getting the manager role or one level up, we see it as all individuals. We see it as a big promotion, right? It's a promotion. So why do you feel that it's not a promotion, but it's a career change?
So, I mean, it is a promotion in the way that like you move up the corporate ladder. Typically you get more money, you get more responsibility. That, you know, that is kind of a promotion. But the reason why I'm saying that it's a career change is because the skills that got you to that point are not going to be the same skills that allow you to succeed in that position. So it's much more like a vertical career change. So you're changing careers, you're getting more money, you're getting more responsibility, but what is expected of you is fundamentally
Changed.
different.
That's so true, because and Gil and I've talked about this many times on our show, how many managers have been given a manager role, but then weren't even properly trained to be a manager.
The statistic that I saw was 58%. That 58% of people who were, at least in this one survey that I saw, it was a big survey, of that were asked who were in managerial positions were never given any kind of training in terms of being a manager. So, you know, we're telling people do completely different things, but we're not enabling them. We're not giving them that enablement. And Michaud, I think you had a great point there about defining what a manager means. That is fundamental for an organization to help somebody in that transition. Because if you're able to articulate being a manager means these skills, these behaviors, this intent, and making sure that the reward system is built on that, they will start to move in the right direction, as opposed to if you leave it up to everybody's subjective opinion of what being a manager is, then you'll have a lot of times where they will start to step in. They will start to do the work for other people, which isn't actually where a manager adds value.
Yeah. And, you know, part of what happens there is if you haven't gotten any training, then you're emulating what you've seen. And that's to be expected. What else can you do but do what you've seen and assume that that is what you're supposed to do? And so then that creates this systemic issue of poor leadership running through the company if no one's being trained, if nothing's happening. And then as people move up, they're just repeating what they've seen and repeating what they've seen. And there's no opportunity for change because no one's telling them how they should be. And they think that that's the successful way because that's what seems to be successful within the organization, and they can't be blamed for following.
But it is a big change. You're going from individual to now managing people. So it's a huge change, but it's also you're managing people. And now let's be real. How many of us know how to manage people? Right? Like there's so many different layers that go into managing people because we're dealing with people. People are complex. You can't group people into one category and think, okay, this person can be managed this way. So you know what? Everyone's just going to be managed this way. So managing people is like a huge component of a manager, which unfortunately so many companies fail to set them up with the right tools because a lot of it is soft skills.
The majority of it is soft skills.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard, especially if those aren't things that you've been cultivating throughout your whole life, right? Like there are certain people, certain industries, certain practices where that is an integral part of the work and the community of practice. But generally, for most people in most careers, soft skills aren't something that are given a lot of credence, a lot of focus, a lot of money towards developing, when that is fundamentally what is going to help you succeed as a leader, especially in this like knowledge worker economy.
Like you said, though, Michaud, that we're just going to follow what else we see. So if we're not doing that intentionally, then people will just end up following what they see. You know, take, for example, feedback, right? Just one of the skills that a manager needs. Most people don't just naturally become great at providing or receiving feedback. It's not just something that we happen to fall into. Those of us that have become better at it have only become better at it because we've been intentional about it. We've recognized that it is a skill and it's something that requires improvement. Whereas as an individual contributor, it's never a priority.
No.
And then if you're not taught how to do that, and this is just one example of how many different skills and behaviors that you need to be a great manager. But if you're never taught that intentionally, you're left to follow either bias or whatever you've seen before, which you'll be lucky if it's the right behavior. You'll be lucky if you end up doing the right thing, which is kind of mind-blowing to me, is that how much do leaders leave to chance when it comes to data in other areas, but then when it comes to people, they leave so much to chance without even recognizing it.
And when the consequences are massive.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's scary.
Well, they're massive both on a human level and on a business level.
On a business level, they're huge.
Well, because for me, my heart is always with the people. So when you talk about, on the human level, a person doesn't know how to give feedback. Well, then I come in, I don't know how to give feedback. I yell at you, you walk away feeling badly and no better at your job.
No.
Which then on the business level is you have a demotivated employee who isn't any better at their job and likely looking elsewhere to do their work.
Less productivity.
Yeah.
But giving feedback, it's not easy, right? Like, especially giving performance feedback to someone who's not performing. Good feedback is always great, right? Like anyone can give a good feedback. Hey, you're doing an excellent job, right? That's easy. But having to address the hard stuff where, let's say, employee's not performing, or employee comes and say they're struggling with something, like how do you help them? I found that throughout my career, a lot of managers, the biggest lack was not being able to, one, give proper feedback, how to actually give negative feedback. A lot of people didn't know how to do that. Second was also how to set up their team for success. Instead of just like barking orders, which some may work like that and some may not like that. So I always found that the two biggest obstacles for managers, especially new managers, was like, how do you give feedback? How do you talk to your employee? And then how do you set them up for success in a way that is different? Meaning, like, what works for me may not work for Gil. What will work for Gil may not work for you, Michaud, right? Like, a lot of people can't navigate those different personalities. But then it's like when you take a step back and you're like, I always ask, okay, what manager training have you gone on? It's always 0. And it's like, wait, how did you get promoted? Or like, how do you not have those channels where you are setting up your managers? I think a lot of companies fail to set up the managers for success. And because you didn't set up your manager for success, then that triples down to their team. They're not set up for success. How can they set up their team for success?
You're scaling the failure.
Yeah.
Failure, yeah. And then that one person now negatively impacts, 2 to 8 to 12 people.
Yep, absolutely.
And that is huge. So just taking a step back to the feedback, you mentioned giving good feedback is easy. I would challenge that most people give good feedback very poorly. what they say are things like, hey, great job. Hey, good hard work. Hey, awesome. But that's not replicable behavior, right? If someone tells me, hey, Michaud, great job, I'm like, cool. What about it? What about what I did made it good? What were the qualities that I exhibited? What were the actions that I took? What did I do that I can repeat, that I can hold on to as this thing that you value? And then when I want to do a good job again, I can do that thing again. It's much more motivating to know how to do a good job than what to avoid to do as a bad job. And I give, like in my workshops, I'll give this example where I get people to stand up. And I'm like, okay, stand up. Great. Now, don't look away from the camera. Don't keep your hands by your side. Don't stand perfectly still. Don't jump. Don't spin around in circles. Don't bark like a dog. Don't, and go through this whole series of don'ts. And what happens is people are like, and hate me a little bit, but we're having fun. And then I'm like, okay, let's try this again.
Well, you're having fun.
I'm having fun, and then I work under the assumption that they're having
everything
fun. Everything
you were saying, don't do this, don't do this. I'm like, then what can I do?
Then what can I do? Exactly. And then I give them the second option, which is stand up, look at the camera, and wave. In both of those instances, that's where I'm trying to get the person, right? I was in the first one, I was giving them an example of everything that is not standing and looking at the camera in the hopes that somehow they'll get there. In the second option, I'm just saying what the hell I want that works. And then they know they can do the thing that I've said I would like done. In that like shift of going from don't to do is incredibly important, and not something that we've learned, right? Like it's okay to tell someone not to do something, but it's not really okay to ask for what we want. And this is outside of work, this is in personal relationships, this is in everything. We can't say what we want until we're telling someone what we don't want. And often we can't say what we would like instead of the thing that we don't want.
Actually, there's research on that. I think it was when my sister had her second child or first, I can't recall. And she was reading something or research or whatever. And they said that don't keep telling the baby, no, 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 no. Instead, teach them, yes, you can do this. Yes, you can do this. Yes, you can do this. Because if you keep saying no, 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 the brain is being wired like no, 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 no. But instead, you can wire their brain. I don't know the entire research, but the concept basically was lead with what they can do instead of always saying can't do this, can't do this, can't do this.
There's a reason.
Sorry, Gil, go ahead.
There's a reason why when I'm around a pool, I always say to my boys, walk. I don't say don't run, because I'm pointing them in the direction of what they're supposed to be doing. For me, in my brain, it often goes back to my dad always tells me a story of this famous baseball pitcher who gave up a big home run the year before. He explained to my dad's group of kids, like my dad was like 10 years old at the time, what happened. So the guy said this, he's like, well, the manager came up to the mound and he said to me, this guy likes the ball high and outside. Don't pitch the ball high and outside. Stop, make sure you don't pitch the ball high and outside. He's like, when I got back on the mound, there's only words in my head were high and outside. Where do you think the ball went? High and outside. So by actually constantly focusing on the negative, that's what the other people are focusing on, which is, I love that you brought up this point, Michaud, that positive reinforcement needs to be direct and it needs to be clear. Because one of the other aspects of it, in tying into all of these other skills that a manager needs, is that by being direct and clear about what you want, it then makes it easier to hold people accountable to it. because you're saying the way to be successful is X, Y, and Z. Now, when I've already told you and I'm clear about what I want, now we can talk about what happened because you did or didn't behave that way. Whereas if I keep on saying to you, no, 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 you have no idea what success actually looks like. There's still, because I was thinking this, I love that activity that you described, because in the proper way of doing it, there's one way to do things. Look in the camera and wave. Whereas when you're saying no, 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 well, it's like, can I say hello? Should I be greeting? Should I be even standing there? I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing at that point. Whereas with that very clear feedback of, Gil, stand there, wave at the camera, I know exactly what I do. And to your point in the beginning, is set people up for success, not failure.
Yeah, like you don't know what you're supposed to be doing, and you just feel like shit and are uncomfortable.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's not where good ideas come from.
Yeah.
That is not where good ideas come from.
No. So one last question, because we only have a couple of minutes left, and I don't know if we even have time to answer this, and it's a complete left turn. But
Great.
One of the questions, but I figured I'd mess with you and ask you this question anyway.
Love it.
One of the difficulties for people who are making this career change from individual contributor to manager is often they're doing it within their own team. That they're now becoming a manager of their former peers. What are some suggestions you have for somebody in that position? Because what happens sometimes is that people are trying to figure out how to create authority among people who you were standing side by side with previously.
I think one of the things is like to not rule over and to think of it as a supportive role. And so clearly communicating, first of all, having those conversations and being like, hey team, this might be a weird thing. Status is about to change. I used to be on the same level as you, and now I'm moving into this other domain. There are going to be some changes to our interpersonal dynamics. It has to happen. So if you're feeling weird about this, that's normal and that's to be expected. Call a thing. If a thing's going to be weird, call it out. And then the second thing is really just like thinking about your job as a manager, as leader, is to truly support, remove roadblocks, and allow for as much success as possible for the people that you're working with. So you're not coming into this new position to get them in trouble. You're reframing what it means. Like, I think about all the time I spent as a kid. My teachers, I didn't see and understand them as someone that was helping me succeed. I saw them as something that was going to get me in trouble. And getting crystal clear about that, that's not what your job is as a manager. It's not to keep people in line and make sure that they follow X, Y, Z. I mean, it may be at some companies, but like in 2021, when you want people that are smart and creative and innovative.
And stay,
or at least are good for the 2 years that they do stay, then that's not how you lead.
Awesome.
You come in to support people.
Well, that was a great answer. Thank you. You handled my curveball well. I appreciate it. We're just up on time. That was a great conversation, as I expected. Michaud, I really appreciate everything you brought today. Can you share with everybody just a little bit about how people can get in touch with you and a little bit on what you do before we go?
Yeah, totally. Follow me on LinkedIn, Michaud Garneau. You can find me there. Check out my website, weirdisnormal.com. I have a podcast, the Weird is Normal podcast, and I do manager training. So if what I was talking about sounded like, oh my gosh, I need this within my company and for people who think this way, then reach out to me, send me a message. I'd love to chat. My calendar links are public. If you want to just book a 30-minute free consult, I'm happy to chat with anyone.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. Gurpreet,
Yeah,
you want to close it out?
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Michaud. Thank you so much. It was nice meeting you. And thank you for sharing such great insights. If anybody needs to get a hold of Michaud, he just told you guys how to do that. We'll be back next week with another topic. No guest, but we'll have a topic, me and Gil. In the meantime, please keep safe, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much.